My name is Sarah Connell. I'm a true crime journalist, and the story I'm about to tell you is not mine. It belongs to a man named Leo Miller. And 60 minutes from right now, I will either walk out of this house as a multi-millionaire, the last man standing in a dynasty of New England old money, or I will spend the rest of my natural life inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, taking the fall for a cold-blooded murder I did not commit. Let me tell you what America never sees behind the white picket fence. I spent 8 months with Leo, piecing this story together from his testimony, court records, and one cassette tape that changed everything. The Millers. That was them. They were the family everyone pointed at from the highway. The breathtaking colonial estate, the manicured lawns, the hand-engraved Christmas cards, the country club membership that cost more than most Americans make in 2 years. From the outside, they were the blueprint of the American dream. From the inside, they were a loaded gun with the safety off. 3 weeks before I first sat down with Leo, his father, the legendary, terrifying Arthur Miller, had summoned all 3 of his adult children back to the family estate for a mandatory Thanksgiving dinner. They hadn't spoken in a year, not since their mother's casket dropped into the frozen Connecticut ground. They thought they were coming home to heal, to breathe, to maybe sit at the same table and pretend to be a family one last time. They were wrong. God, were they wrong. Arthur Miller did not call them home to break bread. He called them home to detonate a bomb. There they were, all 3 adult children, sitting beneath the blinding glare of a crystal chandelier, the size of a compact car, when he reached under his chair, pulled out a thick medical document, and slammed it onto the mahogany table like a judge dropping a gavel. An autopsy report, with our mother's name on it. He looked at Julian, then at Clara. Then his eyes landed on Leo, slow, cold, surgical, and he said 6 words that cracked the world open underneath their feet. One of you poisoned her, confess. He told them the official story, the tragic car accident, black ice, a country road, and was a lie his attorneys manufactured. That their mother had been systematically poisoned over months. That the real report had been buried. And that if none of them confessed before the grandfather clock struck midnight, he would burn the will, dissolve the estate, and leave every single cent of the Miller fortune to the state of Connecticut. Then he locked the doors, killed the cell service, and disappeared into his private elevator, like the devil retreating back into the floor. His name is Leo Miller. And what happened inside that house over the next 60 minutes is the most terrifying, most devastating, most darkly human story I have ever reported. This is all of it. His words. His truth, unfiltered, start to finish. Welcome to Silent Boundary, where we cross the line into the dark truths behind the story. If you love raw true crime, hit subscribe right now and comment below with your theories as the mystery unfolds. Let's cross the boundary. Leo needs you to understand something before we go any further. In the Miller family, he was never the golden child. He was the asterisk. His older brother Julian was the dynasty's chosen heir. Ivy League straight A graduate, Wall Street investment prodigy, the kind of man who wore custom Italian suits to his own high school graduation and had a Rolex before he had a driver's license. He walked through every room like he'd already bought it. His older sister Clara was the perfect East Coast princess. Stunning, polished, married to a state senator with a smile that belonged on magazine covers. And it was regularly. She ran charity galas for causes she barely understood and shook. The right hands at the right parties. She was the performance of perfection, personified. And then there was Leo, the artsy dropout. The kid who left business school to paint abstract canvases in a $900 a month studio downtown. The one who showed up to family functions in secondhand corduroy while Julian wore cashmere. He had debts. He had delinquent rent, a small art studio that barely survived month to month, and a family that had written his name in the margins of their story decades ago. The only person in that entire bloodline who ever looked at Leo like he was worth something, like he was the whole sentence, not the footnote, was his mother, Eleanor Miller. She was his shield, his translator, the only person who could stand between him and his father's contempt and turn it into something survivable. A year before that night, that shield had been ripped away from him. When Leo walked through the heavy oak front doors that night, the house smelled wrong. Old dust, mahogany polish, and something underneath both of those, something faint and chemical, that he couldn't place. Not yet. Julian was already seated at the dining table when Leo arrived, and he refused to make eye contact. He was hyper-focused on his $300,000 Rolex. Tap. Tap, tap, fingers drumming the glass face. Like a metronome counting down to something he already knew was coming. Leo had heard through back channels that Julian's Wall Street firm was in freefall. Illegal trades, regulatory debt in the tens of millions, federal investigators already sniffing around his files. He was ruined. He needed this inheritance the way a drowning man needs a life raft. Clara looked like a porcelain doll someone had left too close to the fire. She wore a stunning black designer dress, not a single hair out of place, but her face was hollowed out. Bloodshot eyes, skin translucent as wax paper. Under the table, her hands were obsessively spinning a small amber prescription bottle, high dose, antidepressants, when her fork kept clicking against her wine. Glass in a trembling, involuntary rhythm. Clink, clink, clink. Whatever she was hiding, it was eating her alive. And at the head of the table, ruling over the room from his high-tech motorized wheelchair, because his spine was finally betraying his aging body, even if his mind never would, sat Arthur Miller. Their father, the patriarch, the tyrant. He looked at the three of them the way a chess player looks at pieces he no longer needs. When he said the word murder, Julian choked on his wine so violently he stained the white linen napkin dark red. Clara gasped like she'd been struck. Leo didn't move. He stared into his father's eyes and waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. He pressed a button on his wheelchair's armrest control panel. The dining room's motorized, steel-reinforced oak doors slammed shut with a sound like a bomb going off. The deadbolts engaged with a mechanical precision that felt premeditated because it was. Then he turned his chair toward the private elevator behind the velvet curtain and simply vanished, locking the access panel behind him. They were sealed in. No signal, no exit. Trapped inside the house that had haunted all three of them their entire lives. Julian erupted first. He knocked his dining chair backward onto the floor and started pacing the room like a caged animal, screaming that the old man had finally cracked, that this was illegal, that he was going to sue the entire estate. But Clara didn't scream. Clara did something that scared me far more. She collapsed out of her chair, crawled across the floor, grabbed the lapels of my jacket with fingers that felt like ice, and pulled her mouth directly to my ear. Leo. Her breath was shaking so badly the words barely formed. Julian is performing right now. He's a psychopath, and he's performing on the day Mom died, at the exact day. I accidentally logged into her shared financial portal. Julian had forged her legal signature. He drained $2 million from her private offshore accounts to cover his corporate fraud. She found out. Leo. She was going to disown him and call the FBI that same night. She tightened her grip on my jacket. Julian poisoned her wine. He killed our mother to keep that money. The second those words left Clara's lips, the storm hit. Not metaphorically. An actual New England nor'easter slammed the coastline like a freight train, and the crystal chandelier above us flickered. Once, twice, then died with a sharp electrical crack. The entire estate went black. 300 years of Miller family history swallowed by darkness. Lightning strobed through the floor-to-ceiling windows every few seconds. In those fractured flashes of light, I heard something. Feet moving across the dining room rug, fast and deliberate. A side door creaked open and clicked shut. Someone had left the room. Here's what you need to understand about growing up in the Miller estate. When your father is a tyrant, you learn the house the way a prisoner learns his cell. Every hidden servant corridor, every secret passage, every squeaky floorboard in every wing of the building. You learn them because your survival depends on it. Leo slipped through the hidden pantry door and moved through the narrow, freezing servant hallways in pure darkness, tracking the sound of frantic breathing descending toward the first floor. It led me straight to our father's private study. The door was cracked open. I waited in the hallway. A bolt of lightning lit the room like a photographer's flash. And there he was. Julian. On his knees in front of our father's heavy, iron wall safe, both hands spinning the combination dial over and over, soaked in sweat, swearing under his breath. I stepped out of the dark, looking for the updated will, Julian? Or the financial records that prove you killed the woman who raised you? He spun around. The Wall Street confidence, the $1,000 posture, the boardroom voice, it was completely gone. His face was pale and stripped and animal. He lunged across the desk, grabbed my jacket collar, hauled my face inches from his. You think you're innocent, Leo? Who was the last person in her bedroom before she collapsed? You. She called you to the house that afternoon because she'd found out about your drug debts. She was cutting you off, signing new paperwork. That very night to remove you from everything. You needed her dead before that ink dried. Don't you dare play judge with me. We both know you had the strongest motive in this house. Before I could answer, before either of us could tear the other apart, a sound cut through the entire mansion from somewhere above us. A scream, but not a human scream. Something primal. Something that didn't sound like Clara anymore. They let go of each other simultaneously. They ran. Up the grand staircase, shoes pounding the mahogany. Lightning strobed the upper hallway. And in that blinding half-second of light, I saw Clara standing frozen outside our father's master's suite, arms extended at her sides, staring at her own hands. They were covered in blood. Leo pushed past her and threw the bedroom door open. The smell hit him first, copper and iron and his father's old cologne, all layered on top of each other in a thick, nauseating wave. Thomas, the family's 70-year-old butler, the man who had served their mother for 40 years, the only grandfather figure any of them ever had. He was slumped against the far wall, eyes wide open and fixed on nothing, throat cut from ear to ear. The blood was still spreading across the white carpet. And in his stiffening hand, clutched with a dying man's last grip, was a torn scrap of old parchment paper. 4 words scrawled in smeared, frantic handwriting, "Leo knows everything." 4 words. And they were enough to end the world. Julian saw the note. Then he looked at the blood on Clara's dress. Then he looked at me. And I watched the fear in his eyes transform into something far more dangerous. Absolute certainty. It was you. His voice had gone quiet now, which was worse than the screaming. You killed her last year. Thomas figured it out. He tried to warn Father tonight, and you silenced him. You're a murderer, Leo. You've always been a murderer. Before I could open my mouth, he crossed to the hallway wall and ripped down the antique crime. Double-barreled hunting shotgun our father kept mounted for display. I heard the click-clack of brass shells loading into the chamber. He raised the barrel between my eyes. Leo ran. Down pitch-black corridors. He'd memorized as a terrified child hiding from a father who saw weakness as an insult. Behind him, boom! A shotgun blast tore through the antique wallpaper and sent wood splinters past his face like shrapnel. He dove down the back staircase, turned hard left, and threw himself into his mother's old painting studio at the far end of the western wing. He deadbolted the door, dragged a solid oak easel across the floor and wedged it under the brass handle, slid down the wall to the floor, gasping. The studio was exactly as she'd left it. Dozens of unfinished oil canvases lined the walls, their dark silhouettes standing over me in the dark like silent witnesses. The storm outside howled through the old window frames. He was going to lose everything. His freedom, his life. Maybe that very night, his right arm brushed against something under the edge of his mother's old roll-top desk, a small velvet compartment he'd forgotten existed. His fingers found something cold and rectangular, covered in dust. A vintage microcassette recorder. Fully wound tape inside. Eleanor used to record her thoughts when she painted alone. Leo pressed play. He expected her voice talking about brushstrokes and color and light. What he heard instead, through heavy, crackling static, was his mother screaming, "Not at me, at him, at Arthur. I found the hidden corporate ledgers, Arthur. I found the Cayman shell companies. You have been systematically stealing from our own children's trust funds for years. To prop up your failing real estate empire, if you do not dissolve the board and return Julie and Clara, and Leo their rightful inheritance by tomorrow morning, I am taking every single one of these documents to the FBI myself. Do you hear me? Your empire is over." The truth hit Leo like a physical blow to the sternum. My mother wasn't murdered by Julian. She wasn't murdered by Clara. She wasn't murdered by me. She was murdered by their father. Arthur Miller had poisoned his own wife, slowly, over months, to keep himself out of a federal prison and protect his corporate legacy. And tonight was never about finding her killer. Tonight was a trap. A sick, premeditated trap. He'd fabricated the murder accusation, murdered his own loyal butler to plant evidence against me, then locked us in this dark house knowing our greed and trauma and decades of learned hatred would make us destroy each other. He wanted us to tear each other apart so he could collect our life insurance policies, bury the financial evidence forever, and keep every cent of the Miller fortune for himself. Crash. The studio door buckled. Julian was on the other side, using the shotgun stock as a battering ram. Crash. The oak easel snapped. The door flew open. Lightning filled the room, and there he stood, tailored suit ruined, twin black barrels pointed at my chest, eyes completely gone. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't beg. I stood up from the floor, looked straight down the barrels, and said, "Pull the trigger if you want, Julian. But before you do, you need to hear her voice." He reached behind him and pressed play on the micro-cassette recorder. Eleanor's voice filled the dark studio, terrified, furious, and unmistakably real, bouncing off the walls and rising above the howl of the storm outside. As her recorded words exposed their father's fraud and malice, and the exact reason she had to die, Leo watched his brother's face change. The rage drained out of him like water from a broken vessel. The shotgun began to shake. Then it slipped from his hands, completely, and hit the hardwood floor with a hollow clatter. Julian dropped to his knees. He pressed his hands over his face and let out the kind of sob that only comes from a man who has finally, irreversibly understood something terrible about himself. Clara appeared through the broken doorway and collapsed onto the floor beside him, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders, both of them weeping in the dark. For 25 years, our father had been the puppeteer. He had deliberately, methodically taught us to compete with each other, distrust each other, and resent each other from childhood, so we would always be too busy tearing each other apart to look at him clearly. He had turned us into weapons aimed at each other. He had made us into exactly the monsters he needed us to be. But in that dark room, surrounded by our dead mother's unfinished paintings, listening to the only honest thing she ever had the chance to record, the spell broke. The grandfather clock down the hallway began to chime midnight. 1, 2, 3. The moment the 12th chime struck, the electronic deadbolts on the mansion's main doors snapped open. Power surged back through the house, and the lights blazed to life. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They walked down the grand hallway shoulder to shoulder for the first time in their adult lives and pushed open the doors to their father's suite. Arthur Miller sat in his wheelchair with a wicked, triumphant smile on his face. He expected to find a survivor ready to sign away their soul. He expected a body. Leo walked straight up to him, snatched the cassette recorder, and pressed it against his chest hard enough that he flinched. "We found her tape, Dad. We know everything. You poisoned Mom because she was going to take your ledgers to the FBI. You killed Thomas tonight because he found this recording, and you locked your own children in this house and tried to make us murder each other in the dark." Leo leaned into his face. "You lose. You lose all of it." His smile vanished. The vein in his neck swelled. He opened his mouth to scream for his security, and then the red and blue lights started strobing through the windows. Police sirens. Half a dozen cruisers screaming up the long driveway. But they weren't here for him. Their father, in the hour before they found the tape, had already called the local police chief, had already leveraged 50 years of political influence and wealth to report that his unstable, debt-ridden youngest son had suffered a violent, psychotic break and murdered the family butler. The bedroom doors burst open. 12 tactical officers with weapons drawn, screaming commands, weapon lights blinding every corner of the room. The evidence was perfectly rigged. Against Leo, his name on the note in Thomas's dead hand. No alibi, no corroboration. Leo closed his eyes and prepared to lose everything. And then Julian stepped in front of Leo. He physically placed his body between Leo and the advancing officers. He reached down to the floor, picked up the shotgun with 2 fingers, set it gently at the lead officer's feet, and raised both hands high over his head. His voice cracked. Tears were running down his face, but his posture was iron. "It wasn't Leo, I did it. All of it, take me." Julian Miller, the selfish golden boy, the Wall Street prodigy who had never once in his 40 years on this earth sacrificed anything for anyone, chose to walk into a maximum security prison to save his little brother's life. In the final burning seconds of the Miller dynasty, he chose to be a brother instead of a banker. My name is Sarah Connell. I'm a true crime journalist, and the story I'm about to tell you is not mine. It belongs to a man named Leo Miller. That night, Leo lost the fortune. The federal government and Arthur Miller's creditors seized the estate, the offshore accounts, the colonial mansion, every last piece of it. Julian is now serving a mandatory life sentence in a maximum security State penitentiary? Leo packs up his truck and drives to see him every single Tuesday morning. No exceptions. Clara changed her name, left the country, and moved to a small coastal village in southern Portugal to finally let herself heal. Leo tells me he hears she's doing better. He chooses to believe that. Their father, the great untouchable, powerful Arthur Miller, suffered a fatal hemorrhagic stroke in his jail cell less than 48 hours after his arrest. He died alone in the dark before his federal trial ever began. When I sit across from Leo in his one-room studio in the gritty part of downtown, surrounded by canvases he can barely afford to frame, I ask him if he misses it. The money, the mansion, the legacy, the American dream with the white picket fence and the crystal chandelier. He looks me straight in the eye. He smiles, a real one, the kind that doesn't cost anything. And he tells me no. Because for the first time in 36 years of breathing, when he wakes up in the morning and looks at himself in the mirror, he is not a black sheep. He is not a footnote. He is not a tyrant's weapon, he is free. And true psychological freedom, as Sarah Connell can tell you, is a luxury that all of Arthur Miller's stolen millions could never, ever buy.